I'll send the handouts in an email also.
Bless you.
All right, Joe. Appreciate y'all being on today. Today we're going to talk about how to read appraisals, and we're going to talk about negotiating repairs for a buyer. So we're going to get right into the appraisal section. I put some things in the chat so you can follow along. When you open a PDF, it comes out sideways. You can hit this button right here, and it'll turn it to where you can see to where it's upright. I included some common appraisal designs or style codes. You're going to see this on appraisals. They don't always have these in the definitions or abbreviations. Some of these are there, others are not. So I have a kind of a cheat sheet for you to begin with so that you can read that. At the back of most of your appraisals, they do have this definition, which is talks about condition ratings, and we'll look at that when we talk about appraisals, um, along with quality ratings. It's usually like the quality of construction is what they're looking at when they do that. So we'll talk about that when we get to those specific line items. And then they have other things, definitions like not updated, updated, and remodeled, meaning is the home updated, is it not updated, or has it been remodeled? All that is also typically at the very end of the appraisals. This is a sample of the data sets or definitions at the back side of appraisals. It's kind of like reading a dictionary, so it's only for reference. So when you're looking at an appraisal and you have questions about what that abbreviation means, you can always go to the back and it'll have what that is there. All right, so this is the first page of the appraisal. It always has invoice. They are different. Some of them will have a picture of the property, others won't. It just really depends on the appraiser itself. There are some key fundamentals that the appraisal board looks at. I'm not going to get in too much of the weeds of that, but I do want to explain this enough to where y'all understand how to read appraisals. So y'all know when an appraisal is ordered, right? You reach out to the loan officer, then the loan officer will then order the appraisal through a third party. Any type of FHA or VA appraisal goes through a third party review. That third party will then take and select the next appraiser on the list. The lender does not get to select the appraiser. It is selected by a third party, and that is for quality control purposes. Um, if it's a conventional loan, then the lender does select the appraiser. They are not as scrutinized as FHA, USDA loans, that kind of thing. Um, so this first just tells who the appraiser is, who the lender was. This invoice number is the appraisal number. That's always the file number. Then obviously the date that it was done. It lists who the buyer was, the property address for the appraisal, how much they charged. Look at that. It used to be 5.25. Anybody know what a VA appraisal is now? Anybody?
800?
850.
God.
Yep. If you go to Charlotte, they're 550. The reason why the price difference is because of demand. Our area has a lot higher demand for VA appraisals, so they are they cost more here. This is the first page of your appraisal. If you look on the left, they're usually broken into different sections. Like this first section up here has subject, then it has the contract terms, it has neighborhood information, has site information, and then it has improvements that the property has. So just some things within the subject property. It lists everything about the subject property, but it also tells days on the market. Subject was listed on this date for that amount. If there was a price change, it would normally list that. Then it talks about the contract terms. Yep, they do have a copy of the contract. It explains that they do or did not analyze it. It also tells what type of it's an arm's length sale, which is your typical sale. Uh, They've explained that there's typical, nothing about it, no personal property. That's the contract price. Date of the contract is a seller, the owner, public record. Then it talks about concessions. Here, it talks a little bit about the neighborhood. This is more about market conditions. I love looking at this section because if I have an appraisal that is not right, usually meaning the value is just way off, this is where I go to first because it shows me just how well the appraiser actually understands our market. It talks about neighborhood characteristics, but then it talks about unit housing trends. And it says our property values increasing, stable, or declining. You know, if it had in our area that they were declining, you would know that the appraiser does not know our market very well. If it has a demand is in balance, well, if it has we have a oversupply, you would know that the appraiser does not know our market very well. Marketing time under 3 months, that's correct. If they had checked over 6 months in our current market, obviously, again, you would know the appraiser does not know our market very well. It's just a good thing to look at. Now, again, we don't have to be professionals at looking at these appraisals, but what they help us do is they help us whenever we have an issue with value or there are concerns or even things that we can watch out for. Our job is to find or to be aware of things so that we can be ahead of any potential problems. Now, the appraiser does not always, or the lender does not always send the appraisal to you. They will sometimes just send it to the buyer. So you can ask the buyer, look, when you get the appraisal, please forward it to me. And this is where you're going to want to start looking at different things. Here about the site, it talks about things like the water. Is it public or is it other? If it is not public, meaning city, county, something like that, then and it has other, you will probably need a well water test. It'll be required if it is not checked public. Here, if it has street asphalt and it says public, you're good. That means it's maintained by the state, county, community, somebody. If it has private, you will probably need a road maintenance agreement, something showing that the road is being privately maintained, either by the HOA, by in the covenants, or by some sort of road maintenance agreement that's signed by all the owners on that road. Some other interesting things are the sewer system. You may think that it's sewer, but then you may think that it's public, meaning that it's city. But if this is checked septic, you need to be looking at things. You need to figure out, wait a minute. We thought this was a community system. They told us, the listing agent said it was on city sewer, and this is checked septic. Somebody is wrong. Need to check that. You need to really look at that. I'm not, again, this isn't intended for me to go every detail. I am pointing out the highlights for you to focus on different things. Talks about here foundation, crawl space. Again, I'm not so worried about this section. It's just interesting to read how they put how much detail that the appraiser puts into these reports. It talks a little bit here about improvements, additional features, special energy efficiency. All they listed was there's a porch, deck, fireplace, fence. You're going to get different information on these appraisals based off of the appraiser. I can send 5 different appraisers out here. I'm going to get 5 different types of reports. Here's where it asks about the condition of the property, right? It says C4, no updates in the prior 15 years. The subject was observed to be constructed with average quality building materials, no measurable external or functional obsolescence noted. So I'm going to pause right there, and I'm going to come back up here to our condition. You see, these are the different types of conditions, right? Condition 1, it's been recently constructed. That's typically new construction. Everything in the house is brand new. C2, there's no deferred maintenance, little physical depreciation requires. It looks like it's been recently repaired or refinished. It's typically a remodel, something like that. C3, you can consider this as just something that's been well maintained, right? Hasn't been updated, but they've taken very, very good care of it. C4, there's wear and tear on the property, right? May need some work. There's some physical deterioration. It's just normal wear and tear. And when you start seeing C5 and C6, you're probably going to see repairs called in an appraisal. In other words, our improvements are obvious. There's a lot of deferred maintenance, and it's in need of some significant repairs. And then a C6 category for condition, there is substantial damage. It needs a lot of work. There's a lot of deficiencies that have severe enough effect on the safety of the property. C6 is usually, holes in the floors, windows. There's, even a hole in the roof could be a C6 because it's going to cause other substantial issues. So when you're looking at that, when we look at value, we don't really do adjustments on our CMAs for condition, right? We look a lot about what the amenities, is it granite or is it not? And what an appraiser looks at, they look at the condition, meaning has it been updated or has it not? So you get an older house, it's in Northwoods, it has been completely remodeled. It's probably going to have a condition of a C3 or C2. If it hasn't been updated, then it's going to have a condition of a C4. You're going to see adjustments, and that's where appraisers make adjustments on the condition of the home. We make more of an adjustment based off of similar comps, age on the home, and then we weigh it based off of the condition of the house. We're not ones that are going to go in and try to determine or make adjustments for that, and just simply because we're not appraisers. So let's get back to the report. Anybody have any questions on the condition section? Just making sure I explained that well enough. Everybody good? I can't see anybody. Let's see if I can.
I think I'm tracking.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya, for the thumbs up. Awesome. All right. So then it asks, are there any physical deficiency or adverse conditions in the property? Right? If this is checked yes, they're probably going to ask for repairs. There's probably going to be some repairs required, and I'll show you what that looks like. So this is where the appraiser does their actual comps. On the appraisal, this first section over here, this is the subject property. They have all the different characteristics of the property. These are the different comparables. Most appraisers use 3. Some will use 5 or 6, depending on the home. Interesting, it has the address, has how far these comps are from the subject property, what they were listed for, the price per square foot, where they got the data from, verification. They also verified the sale and the tax records. And then it tells these are all arm's lengths, they're VA transactions. This means that they gave any concessions on the sale. So that one gave $2,500 in closing costs. This is when it closed. It's when it actually recorded, and that was the contract date. Contract, sale date. I don't get into, they don't put acreage for sites. They do square footage. Does anybody remember how many square feet are in an acre?
$43,560.
Thank you, John. John's an appraiser also, so I figured he would know. But yeah, 43,560 square feet. So if you look at this, that's about a half acre, right? That's about a quarter acre. That's almost a full acre. That's probably about 3/4 of an acre. Just knowing that it's a little over 40,000 square feet. And when you see this, if an appraiser makes any adjustment for land, right, it's because it's probably a significant amount, and it may be that it can be built upon, or there's something else on that property. A lot of times they don't. Though I am seeing appraisers starting to make more adjustments for land. That's usually in situations where it's a half acre versus 10 acres. And if the 10 acres is not in some sort of a wetlands or marsh or flood zone or something like that, they usually will give value for that. I know it changes all the time. Here's our quality rating, which we just looked at. He used all the same. If he would have used properties that were in better quality, they probably would have made an adjustment. Now, for years, they don't do year built, they do age of the home. How many years? How old is it? That's why you see 15, 17, 8, and 5. Notice, when we do CMAs, we do $1,000 a year. This is 15 years old. This is 17. They did not do an adjustment. They typically don't do an adjustment for a couple years old. This one is 8 years old. They only did 7, so it's a 7-year difference. So they made a $7,000 adjustment. This is interesting here. They made a $5,000 adjustment here for quality, but yet they rated it the same. Again, inconsistencies, right? It's just, I'm not sure without looking at the photos why they would do that, but it's interesting to see. Next section, we talk about the condition that's rated in the report above. When you look at those definitions, it's very similar to quality. If we look at here, this tells us room count, bedrooms, and baths. So this one has 2.1, which means it's 2.5 baths. And they only took $1,000 off the half bath. Here we have heated square footage. They made that kind of an adjustment for the difference. Same with that one. Nothing on that one. Even though it's 55 square feet difference, they still made no adjustment. Gets here into the different qualities, like the heat pump. If there's any energy efficiency items, they all seem to be the same. This stands for a carport, right? 2-car garage. Fireplace fence. This one doesn't appear to have a fence. That's why they gave an adjustment, because it's missing. All they have is fireplace. There's appraisers that won't even give adjustments for fireplace. If it's a chain link fence, they're not going to give an adjustment for that. This, where you have net adjustment total, they take a total of all this and give a net. So the only adjustment here was this one at 3,876. So that's what they did here. This one's at $5,800. So what they did is that's a -7. That's a positive, we'll just say a +10 and a +2,000. So that's +12. And you take that and subtract the 7, the net is 5. That's where they come up with a net. Now, when you look at gross adjustment, so this is the property. It's a 2.6 net adjustment, meaning that's 2.6% of the price of the home. But a gross is 8.9. What that means is they just added these straight. So that's 7, that's 17, that's $19,000 in gross adjustments. They don't account for the negatives. They just count for the gross total dollars in adjustments. These numbers, the smaller these numbers, the more comparable the property is. So when you look at an appraisal and want to know why, right? This one is in better condition. That one is superior. This one is inferior. It means it's a less appealing or a less comparable property. You can see what they valued it at: 220, 229, 224. If we come to the bottom of this page, it tells us the indicated value was 225. It's being sold as is, which means they're not asking for any repairs. No repairs are needed in order for the appraiser to give value. Doesn't say subject to any repairs. If there was any repairs required, this box would be checked. No, I'm sorry. This box would be checked if it's subject to being plans completed. So if we did appraisal before the house was completed or had CO, that would be checked. Here, this would be checked where if there are subject to following repairs. And it's based on a hypothetical condition, which means we're not done yet. This one will be checked if it's subject to any required repairs, which require a follow-up inspection and the appraiser to go out. Now, this is interesting because they put here mechanical equipment is assumed in good working order and dwelling is assumed structurally sound and free of insect infestation. Which when they say things like this, it makes me think that it's an older unit, but it's assumed to be working in good shape. That's what I get out of that. Appraisers are only good the day they're done. It was 225,000, and that's the date that it was good on. Tomorrow, that value may be different because if another house closed, the value could be different on the appraisal. It'll change value. On this page are the appraiser's additional comments. They list different things here and the reason why they came up with value on the property. A lot of this is standard language. What you look in this section is if they do some sort of a, let me see, like this one. This one they did what the appraiser did not find value. So when an appraiser is doing an appraisal and they cannot come up to value from what the contract price is, they'll invoke what's called tidewater. Tidewater means the appraiser is not seeing value in the property, and it's normally invoked on a VA and an FHA loan. Now, typically, when that happens, the buyer agent is notified. Sometimes the buyer agent will notify the listing agent, and the listing agent will provide comps. The buyer agent could provide comps, but I don't know why they would, because if it doesn't appraise, it appraised lower, that's benefit to the buyer because the buyer's paying less. Now, we could get into the semantics of if it doesn't appraise, the contract could fall apart and all that, but understand that if the house isn't going to appraise, the buyer doesn't pay as much. And who's paying for the appraisal? Anybody?
The buyer.
The buyer is. So is it in the buyer's best interest for the property to appraise for more? No, it's not. So what will happen is the lender will notify the buyer agent, hey, the appraiser invoked Tidewater, and please send us your comps within a few days. Now, the buyer agent does not have to send in comps unless they're trying to get value because the buyer wants them to. The buyer agent can send that over to the listing agent, but they are not required to. The buyer agent is not required to notify the listing agent that there is a problem with value and that Tidewater was called. Just making sure everybody understands that, because a lot of agents feel that they were required to be notified. They are not required to be notified. So on this example, for the additional comments, they did invoke Tidewater. The listing agent did provide comps. And this is the appraiser just listing what was provided as far as the comps from the seller. I mean, from the listing agent, and then his thoughts on it. That's where you would see that. We could spend all day talking about fighting appraisals and things like that. We're not going to do that. If you get an issue where you have a house that's not appraising, please come see Jenny or I, and we'll help you with that.
Al, could
Yep.
you jump back? I went to hit the unmute button and I actually jumped off the meeting. You were saying that some of the realtors feel that they should be entitled to know about something with Tidewater. What was that? I missed that.
No, what I said was listing agents think that they are required to be notified if Tidewater was invoked, and they are not required to be notified.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Thanks for asking. If this appraisal was a cost approach, meaning they did an appraisal based on what it costs to build the home, then the value determination would be listed here in this section. If they did an income approach it was an investment property and they used to determine value from an income approach, that would be listed here. Again, our SI helps us. If it's in a PUD area, which is a planned unit development area, they would list all the data and all that here. The rest of this is standard language in an appraisal. This is just pretty much the appraiser's certification and a lot of their disclosures and disclaimers, their seal. Again, this is the condition section that I talked about at the beginning, the quality section that we talked about a little bit at the beginning for reference. I'll let you read that because it's very interesting. Again, the handout is in the chat box. Whether the property was updated, again, same thing. This is our data sets for our definitions. And then we get into the photo of the subject property. They have photos of the property itself. Notice they do a shot of the street. They always do a property of the street. Why do you think they do that? Anybody? Condition of the road.
I was just going to say, showing the road that it actually is paved or whatever.
Yep. The condition of the access to the property. You got to remember, the buyers are getting a loan from somebody that has no clue anything about this property. So this report shows everything that if you were going to lend money to somebody that you've never seen the item that you're lending on, this report is designed to help you understand what you're lending money on and that it does have access to that property. Interior pictures of the home. I'm going fast because we got a lot more to get through. And then it just shows the comparable properties. And it usually just has one photo, the outside picture. Now this appraiser, it's interesting. They use a 2-story. The appraiser does their own sketch of the property and determines their heated square feet. This is where sometimes you have issues because the MLS will say something different than what the appraiser has. You can get into disputes there. Some buyers, they say, I wanted 2,200 heated square feet, and this appraisal only has 2,000 square feet. Yeah, I don't know that I want to buy the house now. It's smaller than I thought. It's good to know that when you do your buyer consultation. The appraisers also have a map of where the property is, and then they'll have subject or other properties. The comparables. They use comparables that were quite a ways away, didn't they? That's a long ways. That comparable is a long ways from our subject. This red is our subject. These are 2 comparables, and they use this other one that was way over here, and it was a 2-story. Do you think that's a good comp? I don't. But they got list price. So another version of the map, and that's the end of that appraisal. Let me show you. Nope. This is a sample of an appraisal when they call things like private road. That's checked. Again, we need to get a road maintenance agreement, right? Now, when an appraisal is done, after they get it, the third party reviews it, and then they send it back to the lender. When the lender gets it back, they will then send the buyer what's called a lender's notice of value. They refer to it as an NOV, notice of value. And all that means is the buyer needs to sign it saying that you've got a copy of the appraisal. You've seen what the value of the appraisal is. That's really all this says. If there's any repairs, it asks for that on it. This one asks for repairs. And this is what it looks like, because in the photo section, the appraiser will list pictures of what was wrong with the property. Now, the appraiser is required to peek in the crawl space. They're required to open up the crawl space door, right, and look inside. This one did. Not all appraisers do, but they're required to. This one did, and look what they noticed. They noticed that there is some debris, and this must be a manufactured home because the belly or the insulation, the plastic that holds up the insulation is all ripped. But all they asked for is this debris to be removed. I'm not sure if you can tell, but what else is missing from this crawl space? Does anybody know? Anybody guess?
Is it that coating on the piers?
Nope. Good call. That's hard to tell.
I
Moisture
know.
barrier. I don't see any plastic.
Hmm.
A lot of times appraisers will call that. Moisture barrier in a crawl space is simply plastic that's laid down on the ground. It helps prevent humidity inside the home. So if you go into a house and the AC is working, but it's really humid, there's probably no plastic underneath the house. This appraiser calls damaged fence. So when we're out doing our listing appointments and we're looking at a property or we're walking it with a buyer, things like this, yes, they get called in an appraisal. These are things that we're looking at. Those of you that have gone to my class on how to show a home, we talk about these things. This appraiser also called a repaired or the loose railing. The railing was loose, so it needed to be firmed up. He also called holes in the yard. There were some big holes in the yard.
I have a question.
Sure.
I know I've looked in crawl spaces and there has not been a moisture barrier. You're just saying some appraisers will call it.
Saying some will look. If they don't
Okay.
look, and it really
Oh,
depends on
okay.
the type of loan, but if they haven't looked, then they probably aren't going to call it.
Okay.
Because if they
'Cause
look and they see it's not there, they should call it. Well, an
I'm just thinking
FHA.
about old houses in Northwoods. I
Yep.
know some of those. Yeah, don't have it.
A lot of appraisers don't look in the crawl space.
Okay. So should we be bringing that up?
Bring in one.
Well, never mind. It's rhetorical.
Yeah.
Because if I have a crawl space and I'm looking with somebody, I'll say, you can kneel down if we can get it open. Go ahead and look in there, and that's pretty much covering us.
I
That
don't
they
know that
realize.
I don't know that I'm gonna look in a crawl space or ask everybody to look in a crawl space, but it could be a conversation when you're talking to your seller and you're going through, again, this is a buy side section, so we're just gonna segue real quick. But when you're going through a listing presentation and talking to a seller, and you go through the net sheet and you have your $1,000 or $2,000 set aside for repairs, that would be a good time to bring up something like, we don't know if they're going to call, like if there's debris in the crawl space. I mean, if the house is on a slab, it doesn't matter. But if it's on a crawl space, there could be. Or maybe you don't have a moisture barrier. I don't know. I haven't crawled underneath there. Have you? So that's a good thing to discuss in a listing appointment.
And no, they haven't crawled underneath there. They've never opened that up either.
No,
So
most don't. But it's a good way to explain why
sure.
you have that money set aside.
Thank you.
If you guys take a listing with a crawl space or you have a buyer that goes under contract for a property with a crawl space, FYI, Crawl Space Medic, the company Crawl Space Medic, they do free crawl space inspections and they will tell you what needs to be done in the crawl space and they will give you an itemized estimate for it. And they do it for free, whether it's your buyer or your seller. So if you guys have sellers and you want to get ahead of that, or if you have buyers and you want to get it checked out even before they have a home inspection or, based on a home inspection, they do those for free if you guys want to be proactive with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Any questions on appraisals and how to read them and go through them? Again, we don't need to be experts on reading appraisals. We just need to know to look for things like, is it on city water? Is it on the sewer system that we thought about? Is the road maintained, right? Is it being publicly maintained? And then other interesting information is going to help you with doing CMAs when you start to read these and pay attention to what appraisers are giving value for and what they're not. I dropped all the handouts for this and repairs. We're getting ready to go into negotiating repairs on a buy side. All the handouts are in the chat for you if you want to download those. I will send that out in the email also. So let's get to negotiating repairs, since no one has questions on appraisals. Everybody good with appraisals? So you'll be good with the test after? I'm just kidding. Obviously, there's no test. All right, let's talk a little bit about negotiating repairs on a buyer's side. Now, we can spend all day talking about negotiating because I love it, but I want to help you get set up. a lot of what you do is in setting things up, right? When you go to paint a room, I don't like painting, but I know that if I tape everything off, it's going to make things much simpler. So when you start working with a buyer, a lot of things that you do is helping them, preparing them for what the next steps are. And when you get to the part where you're negotiating, right, you have some tools that you're using, but they're not freaking out. Your job is to be very calm and collected through the process. So let's get into this. So some typical inspections that you have when working with a buyer are a home inspection, right? They usually check the structure, the foundation. They'll go under and look at in the crawl space. They'll check all the systems in the home, all the appliances, overall condition, and they'll flag any visible issues. It's not a pass or fail. They just note, hey, this looks like there's an issue. Hey, there looks like there could be a leak on this plumbing line, things like that. Now, they don't open up areas that they can't get into, meaning if the electric panel is blocked, they will not move stuff to get to the electric panel, but they will pull the cover off the electric panel. They don't get inside the HVAC system, meaning they don't take it apart and look at the specific components, but they will do supply and return temperatures and check that also. When you have a inspection on a home, I usually suggest an HVAC inspection also. They look at the performance, the age, the lifespan. They look at all the interior components of the unit itself, the contactors, things like that, the compressor. And a home inspection, again, they only check temperatures going in and out of the unit. I know this isn't about negotiating, but negotiating on any type of item, knowledge is power, right? So I'm trying to equip you with knowledge on all these items so that when it comes to negotiating, you know what you're talking about, okay? And a lot of that is also preparing the buyer so that when you get to this point, you understand and you can help answer questions. Septic inspection. If the house has a septic, you need to make that a required inspection. If the buyer doesn't want to do any inspections, you need to make the septic inspection required. You need to tell them, look, I understand you don't want to, but this is something that I'm not going to make an option for you. It's $175 to have a septic inspection done. And, these repairs can be very, very expensive. They look at the septic tank. They look at the drain fields. They look at the distribution box. There's a lot that goes on with the septic system, and I do have a class on that. It's in the videos if you'd like to look at that more. A lot of the types of financing that we work with require what's called a WDIR report, which is wood destroying insect report. I'm not sure if y'all know this, but they don't just look for bugs. They don't look just for termites, right? They look for anything, any type of wood damage, meaning wood boring bee damage. They look at any water rotted wood, like at the door casing. That's typically where they find that, where water is rotting the wood. Does anybody know why that's a concern? Why they call that on a WDIR? Okay, well, the reason they call it is because moisture attracts pests. The biggest pest we have that loves that is termites. So if there's any wood damage, right, meaning there's wood boring bees, it could affect the structural integrity of the home. If there is wood damage from moisture, that could obviously attract other bugs to cause more problems to the home. That's why the WDIR is so important to get. Other inspections that a buyer is going to get is a survey, because it'll reveal encroachments. A water or well test. If the house is on a well, they're going to be required to have a water test done on the property. Lead-based paint. If the home was built prior to 76, you have to have a lead-based paint. Radon. Don't think that just because we're on the coast, radon does not exist, right? If that's a problem, a lot of folks come down here from up north and they're very familiar with radon. If the house has a granite countertop that came from the core of the earth, it could have radon trapped in it. Very unlikely, but it could. So if someone wants radon test done, you can still get one of those done here. Foundation or an engineer inspection. If the home is a manufactured home, you're going to be required to have an engineer report to show that that home was put on that property according to local code. So you need to be thinking about these things when you go into buying any type of these homes. A manufactured home, that's an additional expense. Those run anywhere from $350 to $500, depending on who you hire. An older roof, you may want to get a roof inspection done. The buyer may be concerned with that. Has anybody dealt with a buyer that's just wants every possible inspection that there can be done? Anybody? Well, if you haven't, when you do, you're going to be very, very busy, okay? Because these are all the inspections they're probably going to want to have done. These are all the things you need to be asking for and looking for, asking the buyers if they want done and looking at when you're showing homes. If there is a pool, they're probably going to want a pool inspection done. One of the biggest issues we find with pools is they were put in without permits or they are not put into code, meaning they don't have the fence around them with a latchable gate. That's a huge thing. That became effective in 2016, and a lot of people were still putting pools in properties and did not do the fence. It does not pass current code. A pool inspection will reveal that, along with there's any cracks in the lining, things like that. A fireplace inspection, sometimes that's called an appraisal. Usually the lender will reach out and say, we need a fireplace letter. It's typically required for a ventless fireplace. They want to make sure that it is truly ventless and there's no toxic odors getting into the home. And if it's not ventless, then do we have some sort of carbon monoxide detector in the house? So those are typical inspections. And we know that. We know what we're getting into when it comes to helping our buyers. So when we work with buyers, we need to set expectations up front, right? Before the inspections, you need to tell the buyer, look, the inspector's job is to find problems. That's what they're paid to do. Every home is going to have problems, even new construction. And we're not looking for perfection, right? We just want to make sure that there's any major issues or material concerns that are addressed. If you don't prep the buyer before this, you're going to spend the next 3 days to weeks managing emotions with the buyer instead of negotiating. So these are conversations you need to have with the buyer up front before you order inspections. When you're walking the home and you see issues, you say, look, we'll have a home inspection done, but understand they're going to find and they're going to try to scare the shit out of you. That's their job. Their job is to find these problems and to scare you. But prep your buyer. You got to control the reaction, right? You'll know that when you are negotiating things, you're not just negotiating with the other agent. You're negotiating with the buyer too, right? Because you're trying to make sure the buyer is okay with things. That's a form of negotiation. When you get the reports, you review the entire report, not just the scary items. You look at every little thing because they may say there's a big problem with the foundation, right? But the reason there's a problem with the foundation is because the hot water heater is leaking, or there's an electrical issue, or some other issue in the home that could be even major, a lot more important. Encourage the buyers to call the inspector with questions. I don't want you to interpret it and feel like you are a contractor or need to be a contractor. So if you have questions on the report, I'd advise you to call the inspector first so that you understand what that is. And then when you talk to the buyer, if they have further questions, you ask them to call the home inspector. I don't want you to try to interpret something that you don't understand. So have them call the home inspector. If they still don't understand, then get a general contractor to help answer the questions. It's not your job to be the contractor. It's your job to help them understand the report. And when you go through the report, you simply separate major issues, structural issues, roof, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, leaks, things like that, right? Minor issues, cosmetic, like loose handles, paint, small cracks. Now, paint and small cracks are considered cosmetic issues, and they're not required to be repaired. So when you're showing a home and you see paint issues and things like that, please point them out to your buyers. Because when it comes on a repair request and you send that over to a listing agent to say, I need this painted, they're going to laugh at you. They are not required to paint it. Don't let a $10 fix kill a $300,000 transaction or a $600,000 transaction, because some of these things can be fixed pretty easy. If your buyer is really concerned and you're not getting anywhere with the listing agent, call a contractor and get prices yourself. That's a good tactic to use, is to send it over to a contractor that you know and ask him to give you estimates on what the repairs are going to cost. Or when you send over the repair request to the listing agent and they come back, ask for a copy of the estimate for the repairs. If they have a true estimate and they say, we're going to do this, this, and this, then they probably had an estimate done on those repairs. If they come back and want to offer concessions, I would definitely ask for an estimate, because a lot of agents will just guess. We'll just say, yeah, we're going to give you $2,000 to replace that air conditioner. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I want to see an estimate. Let the buyers decide what matters, right? Ask them, what's your top concerns? What on this report concerns you the most? Then narrow it down, right? You want to focus on anything safety, electrical issues. We have a hole in the floor, something like that. Functional issues, right? The dishwasher doesn't work. The drain in the sink is stuck, is clogged up. Or big ticket items. There's a roof leak. Roof needs to be replaced. It's at the end of its life. Yeah, that's a big ticket item. Now, understand that if they come back and say that the HVAC system is at the end of its life cycle, if it's functioning as intended and it's just really old, the buyers can't do anything about it. Now, they can request that it be replaced, but as long as it's functioning as intended, the seller is not required to replace that unit just because it's old. Understand that, right? That's the key words right there, functioning as intended. So if somebody comes back and they says, well, it's working, yeah, but it's making this loud noise. It's not functioning as intended, because functioning as intended, it does not make that loud noise. You understand the difference with that? Y'all were asleep? Everybody good? Yeah? Cool. Thanks, Tanya.
We're here.
Again, everything matters when it comes to for the buyer. I don't know why it says nothing gets negotiated well. I missed something there. So when you send over a repair request, I always would send over everything on the report. Absolutely everything. Yep, all of it. I know what was concerning to my buyer, but it gives me room to negotiate down. Because if the buyer says, I'm only concerned with the plumbing leak and the hot water heater being replaced, but the doorknobs are loose and the light doesn't work, or there's a window that's fogged up, it's not a concern to them. You know what? I'm still going to ask for it all, because if I get all of that, and the buyer's going to think I'm a rock star, and they're going to refer more people to me. This gives you room to negotiate down. Again, if you start small, meaning I only want the AC repaired and the hot water heater pressure relief valve fixed and the doorknob tightened, we're okay with the window and everything else. You've already lost your leverage, because the listing agent's going to come back and negotiate that down even more. Their job is to not spend as much money for the seller. Your job is to get as much as you can for the buyer. So always recommend that you ask for everything on the report, right? Have a conversation with your buyer and understand what's important to them, and that's what you're focused on. So I send over a repair request and I want all these items fixed. There's 10 items. And they come back and they say, well, we'll do 2 of these items. And they're the 2 items that your buyer wants fixed. I wouldn't just say, yeah, we're good. I'm going to go back and I'm going to try to get more for the buyer, because I'm going to say to them, look, we got these items. Is there anything else on here that's a major concern? If they say, well, I really don't want to have to do that, but I will, then I'm going to counter and try to get that. That is your job, is to make things as easy for that buyer as possible. Again, you got to keep the emotions out of things, folks, right? You got to do it with strategy. You know there's going to be pushback. You know the listing agent is going to come back and they're going to send something back to you, right? Always, always gonna. They're not just gonna say, "Yeah, we're fixing this." Yes, Tanya.
So if you have one item that's a major concern for your buyer, would you also put the moderate concerns
Everything,
or okay,
everything on the report goes.
okay,
Absolutely, the whole list.
okay, to
Yep,
get as much.
absolutely.
Okay,
That's how you
thank you.
negotiate down, right? If the buyer says, "I only want this thing fixed," my conversation with the buyer is, "We're going to ask for all of it. Are you okay with that?" "Well, I only want this item fixed, but would you feel better if everything was fixed?" "Well, yeah." "Well, then we're going to ask for it all."
Okay,
Because that gives you a lot better chance on negotiating every to get at least that one major thing. The listing agent may come back and they may say they're doing items that aren't a big concern to your buyer, but they say they're not going to do that's the huge concern item for your buyer. Well, now we can negotiate. Nope. I want this, this, and this, which includes my large concern. That's what I need to have fixed. That's what's a concern to my buyer.
okay,
Be ready to drop items, prioritize the big ones, and trade items, just like I gave the example. You move things around, right? Um, Anybody play poker? Yeah, I love playing cards, and I'm all in. I'm always up there. If anybody knows, when I go to events, and it's I've done the one of those events where you do the auction or the buy the ticket, and at the end there's one ticket left. It gets all the money. What is that? Reverse auction. What's that called, Jenny? Do you remember? Um,
The reverse raffle?
Reverse raffles. That's right. And they usually have like a $5,000 prize, and they keep drawing tickets. And at the end of the night, there's only one ticket left. But when it gets down to like three people left, they give them the option to split the prize money between the three. Well, I've been there, and I've said no, I'm not splitting it. Then it gets down to two, and they say, "Do you want to split that?" And I'm like, "Nope. In for a penny, in for a pound, baby. I'm all the way." And I've won and I've lost. But I've gone into it knowing that I'm going to lose or I'm going to win, and I'm okay with both. Um, no emotion, folks. Our job is to be clean, cool, and collected, calm and collected. Right? There's always going to be back and forth. Always, always, always. So know some alternatives. Instead of repairs, right? You can get closing cost credit. So the seller doesn't want to make the repairs. They're going to give money at closing instead of fixing items. And then the buyers, they're responsible for making the repairs after closing. If this happens and they want to give a credit for repairs, it's typically towards closing costs. You can't put on the CD that they're giving $3,000 for repairs, because then the lender's going to say, "What kind of repairs are you making?" They're going to want to see it all. So you're going to need to make those credits as a closing cost concession. But if you do that, you need to make sure that we haven't met our concession limits, right? We haven't exceeded that. Because if we're already at the top end and we're trying to add more, we're not going to get it at closing. You got to check that. Lender approval is only about concession limits. You never let the lender know anything about any of the repairs needed, because that's going to kill a deal really quick. They're going to want engineered letters, or they're going to want general contractor letters to make sure everything's fixed. Another option, instead of making repairs, is maybe the buyer just wants the price to be reduced and they're still going to make the repairs on their own. Again, it's not real common around here. Sometimes it's cleaner because you don't have to worry about closing cost credits or anything else. It will impact some financially, but it's going to help them as far as payment versus it is about how much money they're going to bring to closing. The other one, buyer handles all the repairs, meaning the seller gives no credits. They don't want to do anything. Or the seller does give a credit. Either way, some buyers, they don't want the seller to make any repairs. They just want to handle it all themselves because they just don't like the type of work that's been going on for the buyer, or that they've seen the seller has done. So in that instance, the buyer might just say, look, I want to fix it all myself, which means they want control over the quality. Their timeline is tight. They don't want to have to wait for repairs. They just want to get it done. And the seller may not want to deal with contractors. They can still get a closing cost credit or a price reduction, but you're going to run into some buyers that they want to just handle the repairs themselves. Again, sometimes the repairs, sometimes the best option is just no repairs. It's just money. Some buyers, they just want closing credits. And that's another option going into the transaction, knowing that there's going to be some repairs called, and your buyer's good with making those repairs. You don't want to tell the listing agent that, because in the inspection report comes back and you go and ask for repairs, I'm still going to ask for all the repairs. And when they come back, my goal is to get cash, because then I can get more cash for closing costs. But I'm not telling the listing agent that. I'm still going through that same process. I'm still sending over a repair request. And I'm hoping and wanting them to come back and say, I'm going to give you a credit. Cool. That's what I wanted all along. The listing agent feels they won because they didn't have to make any repairs. They just gave $2,000 credit. That's cool. My buyer only wanted a $1,000 credit, and they never wanted the seller to make the repairs anyway. Is that a win-win? That's right. You're damn right. That's a win-win. I've done that many, many times. It works really, really well. And again, this is where understanding and knowing everything that's going on, talking to your buyer, what's important to them, understanding all their inspection reports, also understanding what kind of credits and how to move that stuff around. That's your job. And this all helps keep that transaction together. Don't nitpick yourself out of a house. Don't sit here and say, this little thing and this little thing. Now, if it's a major issue, you need to make sure they understand that. Sometimes you may need to get them to sign something saying, look, that's a major issue. You understand this is going to fail in the future. I'm advising you to either have the sellers fix this or not move forward. And we may want to have them to sign something. If you get into that, you need to come see Jenny or I. Again, always bring it back to, is a home still a good buy? Are the major risks addressed? Meaning, did I address everything that was major or a concern to my buyer? And the main thing is my buyer comfortable with that outcome, right? When the negotiation doesn't matter, winning the negotiation really doesn't matter if the deal dies. A lot of agents are more about winning than they are about keeping things together. Questions? Yes, Tanya.
If you have an inspection from a previous buyer where the contract fell through, do you think it's best if you have another offer to present that to move things along a little faster, to present that previous inspection that you received?
Are you talking on the seller? You're talking on the listing side.
Yes.
It depends.
Okay.
That's a typical real estate answer, and it really depends. It depends. If there's any material facts, they need to be at least disclosed or released. Now, if you don't have permission from the buyer to pass that along, then no, you can't.
No, if there's no material facts, then would you recommend?
If you don't have permission from the buyer, you cannot.
Okay.
From the previous buyer.
Okay. Okay.
You
Understood.
cannot pass along that inspection report. You can list the items that were there on the report and what was repaired, but you cannot share that inspection report without that buyer's permission.
Understood.
Yep. Questions? What kind of questions do y'all have? Any questions at all? Man, you all are just too easy today. Did anybody get anything out of today? Anybody? I get some thumbs up, some head shaking, yes. A lot of quiet people.
Yes.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Roberta. I'm glad you all learned something. That's what these are all about. I will email this stuff out. Jenny, I'll send it to you for your office too. And if y'all have any questions, please come see us. Okay? Appreciate y'all being on today. Have a great week and have a good weekend.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Now.
Bye.
Thank you.